Hello everyone, and what I'm going to talk to you about today is quite honestly historic. So, over the last 24 hours, massive geopolitical developments have unfolded in the Middle East, and they are already sending shockwaves through the global markets. So, according to emerging reports, coordinated strikes have occurred involving the United States and Israel having targeted strategic sites in Iran, so pretty much sites that have some kind of military involvement. And in response, a missile and drone attacks have reportedly hit the Gulf region, so including the infrastructure in Dubai. There's been a lot of videos surfacing online of these events, and as I said, it's obviously, I feel like it's on every global news outlet, so this is obviously something crazy. As you can see in the news article, I think it's a tweet. It's a tweet news article. Anyway, Trump says that this obviously confirms the major combat operation, and his objective is to defend Americans, pretty much eliminating the threats from the Iranian regime. And he goes on saying a vicious group of very hard, terrible people. And in the video, he does mention the fact that they should not have nuclear weapons, they are bad people, and gives a good speech on what is going to happen and how he feels about this whole situation. So pretty much, Iranian supreme leader has also been killed in this escalation. This is it's one of the most destabilizing moments, I'd say, in modern Middle Eastern history. So obviously this has had a massive impact on everything, I'd say. And as you can see, there are a few. I like this site. It says it's like a timeline. It just shows you like a thing of what's happening anyway. Israel and the US launched a massive joint military operation, as I said. Donald Trump warned on Sunday against Iranian retaliation over the US. Pretty much, it's like a back and forth at the minute. Trump did address this matter publicly, signalling there's going to be a strong involvement of the US in this whole situation. And a result of this, as obviously emergency alerts, airport disruptions, and military retaliation. So pretty much this is no longer a political tension, it's an active escalation. So as more news sources come in, it's getting more and more heated. I mean, that's how I see it. And whenever conflict erupts in the Middle East, markets react fast. Now, here's the key part most people don't fully understand. When geopolitical conflict escalates in this region, it directly impacts four major things. So firstly, being oil. Secondly, we have the US dollar. Thirdly, the bond yields. And finally, the global risk appetite. So let's break this down. So the Middle East is critical to global energy supply. Any disruptions or any even like threats of disruption immediately drive oil prices higher. So if oil spikes, inflation expectations will also rise with it. And when inflation expectations rise, central banks are forced into a difficult position, or they may have to delay rate cuts, and they may need to maintain tighter policy, and finally they may signal hawkish guidance. So secondly, the US dollar. During global uncertainty, capital flows to perceived safety. So historically, that means flows into the US dollar and US treasuries. A stronger dollar creates tightening financial conditions globally. When the dollar strengthens, risk assets feel it. That includes stock and especially crypto. So thirdly, we have the bond yields. In the immediate shock phase, investors often rush into bonds, pushing yields down. But if inflation expectations jump higher because of oil, yields can reverse and move higher. That creates volatility across all asset classes. So, fourth and final one was the global risk appetite. So, when missiles are flying and uncertainty rises, institutions reduce exposure to speculative assets. Liquidity thins out and volatility expands. And crypto is obviously extremely sensitive to liquidity conditions. So in the short term, this type of geopolitical escalation is usually negative for crypto markets. So during fear-driven environments, capital rotates defensively. But, and this is important, there is another side to this. If tensions persist and systematic risk begins spreading into credit markets, equities or funding markets, policymakers may step in. History shows a pattern. So if global growth expectations weaken because of sustained conflict, central banks may eventually lean dovish to cushion the economic blow. And crypto, at its core, reacts to liquidity. So now let's talk specifically about Bitcoin. So let me just bring up my chart. Obviously, high volatility environments, Bitcoin typically holds up better than altcoins. When markets decline, altcoins drop harder and faster because they sit further out on the risk curve. So if the dollar continues strengthening in the immediate aftermath, that could pressure Bitcoin in the short term. But however, if oil-driven inflation fears transition into growth fears and policymakers hint at stimulus or easing, that becomes a different setup. Liquidity expansion has historically been supportive for Bitcoin. Geopolitics creates this fear phase, so pretty much liquidity determines the recovery phase. And now zooming into the technical structure, I'm going to show you a little bit about what I've got going on this chart. So pretty much locally there is a liquidity building near recent lows, and that area could act as a magnet if the risk off accelerates. And obviously there's also a significant liquidity sitting around the 59900 region. So that's just under this sell liquidity line that I've got, and that's directly on the end of this tail. So pretty much if the dollar index weakens into the weekly open and equities stabilize, upside liquidity targets between 70,000 and 72,000 become relevant again. So as you can see, it's marked on my chart right here. So it's 70,000 here and the 72,000 here. And pretty much the US market will be opening tomorrow, and I think it's going to be very, very critical. We will see either the institutional positioning confirm risk off, or whether dip buyers step in aggressively. So right now it is pretty difficult to predict the price direction, as liquidity across crypto markets remains relatively thin, and Bitcoin is still heavily influenced by the stock market flows. And obviously geopolitical headlines can move price in minutes. And in regards to what's going on over the weekend, I believe that tomorrow's market could get a little bit hectic. So obviously for now, we can expect some volatility. Obviously, we can expect the sharp moves, and that's it. Remember, geopolitics drive fear, but liquidity drives markets. And I will update you in the next one, and we'll see how the market reacts tomorrow.